Welcome to Love Your Life, Love Your Job, Love Your Life podcast. Today, I am joined by Valerie Todd. Welcome, Valerie. Valerie is a Chief People Officer, but very much focused on the education sector, which is really interesting. I've got two kids. One of them has just finished education, and one of them is going through the process and starting her GCSEs next year. So the education system is something that's very close to my heart, especially with my kids not necessarily being the most academic out there. But there we go. So Valerie, I'm delighted to have you on. I know we're going to talk about kind of the education sector, but there's lots of stuff in there that, if you're a parent, hopefully you might find some interesting stuff. If you work in the education sector, you might find some interesting stuff. But actually, if you're just interested in the world of HR and people, again, there'll be loads of stuff in here that could be useful for you as well. So Valerie, welcome. Let's get straight into it, because the education system and the education, and its inverted commas, is a very interesting one. And I know when we spoke, we talked about what it was like when I went to school and when we went to school. As time's gone on, there seems to be a lot more strain. And I use the word strain on the education system. And not just from a perspective of it's not one way. So the strain, there seems to be a very much a strain, both from a teacher perspective, but also from a child perspective. So I know this is straight in, but why do you think that is?
From what I can see, James, the strain on the education sector, particularly around in primary and secondary schools, are a lot to do with funding. All right, the biggest problem schools are facing is funding, because I can see that over the last maybe 15 or so years, school funding has decreased year on year. In 2009, we had austerity, and that's when it started. Yeah. And pay was more or less frozen in the public sector for quite a significant amount of time. That contributed to a creation of a movement of teachers from schools to other employment. And I think what's happening is more teachers are actually leaving teaching than are joining. So I'll probably come to that later on.
Yeah.
On workload, I think that teachers face excessive administrative burden. And I've actually been speaking to teachers before I did this podcast, and I'm going to quote some of what they said. Yeah. But there's so much administrative burden that they don't seem to have the time for their professional development. And when I talk about administrative burden, it's a bit more than just marking homework. There's lots to do with data. And I've worked in several academy trusts, and the way education is going, it's all data driven. Children have to make 2 levels of progress every term. And if they don't make that progress, then it's a problem for the teachers. There are mental health challenges. And when I talk about mental health challenges, that's both from a child's perspective and from school teaching and school staff generally, from their perspective. The burden on teachers, and some of what they're seeing in children is impacting them. I've spoken to teachers who tell me that children in reception class and year ones are coming to school without having what you'd expect. Like, you'd expect them to be toilet trained, but some of them are not. You expect them to be able to eat with a knife and fork. A lot of them don't. Some of them are coming to school. So, but the problems that are manifesting at home, those problems are actually being brought into school, which is facing a huge, huge burden on teachers.
Yeah.
And another thing is changes in DFE policy. I remember in the last couple of years, I couldn't tell you how many ministers for education we've had. Now we've got a new one, and we're hoping for some stability. But the goalpost constantly keeps moving. So people who run schools or people who teach in schools, things have to be changing pretty fast. And I think from what I can see, that puts them under a lot of stress.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point, Valerie, because, when kind of bringing that back to almost an individual at work or a private sector client, it doesn't really matter. I've worked in lots of large organizations where, you might have had 4 bosses in the space of 3 years, or, you might have had organizations change. So structurally, you might have changed from going into this division into another division, and organizations cycle processes quite a lot, and that causes lots of uncertainty and issues for exactly the same reason that you've just said. is there is no stability, and therefore you get lost of, right, well, are we on this path or are we on that path? Or actually, are we on that path over there? And then somebody else comes in, it constantly changes. So, it's a really valid point but it doesn't just happen in education, it happens across all work. And certainly I've experienced it.
Yeah, but the problem with it happening in education, it impacts children, and it impacts them a huge deal. Yeah, so from a child perspective, I know there for some children, there are a lot of pressure to perform, and that in and of itself creates problems. And what I realised is there was a lot of children that did not return to school after the pandemic. Because if you remember, at some point schools were closed and children weren't in school, apart from children who were the children of care workers or doctors, nurses, all that sort of thing. They were the only ones in school, but they weren't actually doing any curriculum development type work. They were just doing the same as what the children were doing when they're at home.
Yeah.
That created a major problem, which is going to take a while to get out of.
Right.
I think in pre-pandemic, we had children out of school rate of 4.9%.
Right.
Since pandemic, last spring 2024, there was about 7.9 children not in school. That's about, in terms of numbers, that's huge.
Yeah.
And also, when you measure, DfE measure absence rates in children.
Yeah.
And there are, last year, or was it 22 to 23, there were 1.9 children across the UK missing 10% of their schooling, 10% or more, rather.
Yeah.
This in and of itself creates a problem for teachers because you're always playing catch.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that will be resolved, because those children are missing chunks of school, and when you miss an amount, you just can't catch up.
No.
So there's all these problems.
That then has knock-on effects further down the line, because we've got children leaving school that aren't educated to the right level. They're going into the workplace. Then it does have knock-on consequences further down the line for the UK economy, right?
Yeah. And I think from what I can see, and I talked to an SEN teacher, and I talked to an SEN, someone who awards the ECHPs, now the EHCPs, and these are education and healthcare plans for children with either learning difficulties or SEN children.
Yeah.
Now, there's a major problem, because 1 in 19 children are on an education health care plan.
1 in
19 children. 19.
Oh, 1 in 19.
Right? They're children between the age of 5 and 15.
Wow. So 20%.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, roughly about that. And teachers, especially early careers teachers, come to the profession to teach children, but they don't necessarily, from what I can see, have the skills to deal with SEN children.
Yeah.
So that, there's specialist teachers in school that do that.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a problem for parents as well, because there's a load of children in school that haven't been able to get an EHCP plan for their child.
Right.
So the person I spoke to, her job is to put forward cases for parents to access these funds so their children can get additional help in school.
Yeah.
The majority of parents who apply for it don't get it.
Wow.
All right. So we have a huge problem.
Yeah.
So there are children in schools, and SEN children are as ambitious as any other child.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't they have what it takes to get them to get the most out of education?
Yeah.
But that's not happening at the moment.
No.
Young people in school struggling. I mean, struggling to just to learn and to feel included and all of that.
Yeah.
And for a teacher, that's pretty hard work. For the ones I've spoken to, it's pretty hard work. And for the parents, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And because the children aren't given what they need to thrive, so the parents are in battle with the local authority.
Right.
The local authority just hasn't got the money. Local authorities just don't have the money. They can't get it from anywhere. They don't have the money. So we're hoping that with the change of government that we've got, they might inject more money into
the education system.
SEN.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit around why there's some strain there, and I mean, you pulled out probably 5 different things there, Valerie, that probably all need addressing and looking at and discussing in quite a lot of detail. But what needs to, you've talked about, funding for the SEN population, but what needs to be done to alleviate some of this pressure? So, because what I talk about with Engage to Succeed is all about helping people to love their job or love their life more every day. So that's in the corporate world or when we're in work. But it's as equally important that children in school are engaged the same as people at work are engaged, because the more engaged you are, the more productive you are. The more productive you are, the better you get on and the more you learn. What needs to be done to alleviate some of this pressure and create a more engaging environment, not just for kids, but also for teachers?
Okay. So to me, it goes down to funding and resourcing. I've known schools where teachers are really frustrated because the reception kids, there's probably about 10 books in the class. So the books have to keep going round and round and round. There's not sufficient funds. There's not sufficient resources. Some boroughs, some local authorities are better than others. And I say local authorities, I mean, some where there's slightly more wealth, things are better. But in a urban school, in a deprived area, sometimes you struggle, especially in primary schools. And also, shortage of teachers. If there's teachers not there, then you get a supply teacher in. If you get a supply teacher in, they're very good and they're qualified teachers, but they're not the main teacher for that class. So if children go to school and they see somebody else, because you know what children like, they like to see the same person, especially primary school, the same person doing the same thing. They become little creatures of habit. So there's influx of supply teachers. There's high sickness rates among some teachers in some of the schools that I've worked with, and there are people leaving. And in the primary schools, turnover is quite high in teaching. Especially, I worked in one borough. I think it was Hounslow. The turnover was pretty high.
Just in primary or in secondary too?
In all of them, actually. Some of the secondaries, it depends really. Teachers need to be motivated. They need to be paid properly, and they need to be less admin driven. The ones I've talked to said, and they need to feel they're in control. There's a lot of pressure on teachers. I work for an academy sponsor who will remain nameless. They like to do lesson observations, but they wouldn't tell the teacher they're doing a lesson observation. So you might be there teaching a science lesson or a maths lesson. In walks somebody doing a lesson observation. Now, can you imagine, you're at work, you're happily doing your job, and then somebody walks in without telling you and is watching you and writing their little notes down about how you did. That I find really difficult. It's good for teachers to be observed in their practice, but it'd be better if they knew it was going to happen and if they could do it on their terms. That's what teachers told me, working in HR, talking to teachers and unions as well. And lesson observations was one of the, they felt, to them, it feels like micromanagement. So it's not them. So the academy trust I worked in, there was a lot of teachers on edge because you never knew when you're delivering your lesson if somebody's going to rock up. And you might be called in afterwards or some point to say, well, actually, you didn't follow this structure or you didn't do that.
That's like many years ago when I was a sales rep for and I won't tell the brand for the same reasons as you're not saying the economy, but it was a consumer brand and I used to sell to independent stores. And I used to get exactly the same, where the morning I'd just get a phone call from my boss going, James, where are you? I'm coming out with you for the day. And you'd be like, oh, well, thanks. But that's just really put me on edge. What have I done wrong? What have I done? Why are you watching me? And but for exactly the same reason, the teachers probably feel exactly the same. You've got someone sitting there, you get pressure. And if you don't, especially if you don't know about it, if you know about it, you can process it. You're going to plan anyway, but you can just process it so you know that you've got someone there that's watching you. But I get that. I really get that.
Yeah, and I think teachers' pay has improved a bit in the last year or so, but I still think for what they actually do and what they actually need to get, with the qualifications they need to get to where they are, I still think we're nowhere near what the rest of Europe, Western Europe anyway. We need to give teachers, as I said earlier on, there's more leaving the profession than are joining. And for me personally, and I'm not an expert on what it is to be a teacher, but looking at it from an outsider, the best perk they have is a teacher's pension,
Yeah.
but the many joining are young. They're not too worried about pension. They're worried about getting a decent pay, and they're worried about children coming to school hungry. I talk to teachers who've gone out to buy bread to make toast out their own money so that children aren't hungry. So the teachers that say they're doing more pastoral stuff, there's teachers in the secondary school especially, with the children who have problems at home. They're coming from families where there's domestic violence. They're coming from families where there's poverty. And they come to school with all this, nowhere to unload. I mean, I know of one person where a child came to school and said, I don't really want to go home because my dad's always angry. And the child was crying. And so the teacher didn't know what to do. And she didn't feel she could do anything. So, I mean, there's all those issues. Teachers.
And I suppose these issues are, that they're almost wider than the education system because they're socioeconomically deprived issues, or they're wider. And let's not get into a political debate, but they're wider than just education. They're much bigger than that around the cost of living crisis and all of those other bits and pieces that come into play. So we've talked very much around the teachers are trying to do things to make it better for kids. And yes, there's the budget constraints that teachers and schools are up against. But how can the education establishments and how can the education system start making some of these changes? Because I'll give it, and maybe we can discuss this one in a little bit more detail. Simple things like trust and respect. And I'm going to show my age now, Valerie. But when I went to school, there was you respected the teachers that were teaching you. You had respect for them, probably more than. And I'm not saying the younger generation don't have respect, but you talk about mental health, you talk about socioeconomically deprived areas, you talk about children coming to school that probably don't have necessarily or haven't necessarily been taught the concept of respect and trust. And sometimes, teachers, and again, it happens in general life, you put your trust in somebody and hope you get that trust back, but often that doesn't happen, does it? So how can we start making some of these changes, whether it be trust and that be reciprocal between parties, whether that be more training for teachers that is not educational, it's more about mental health? Is it about the educational system? It would be a brave government to do this. Does it need a big shake up and bring it into the 21st century? What are some of the things that the education establishments and what governments can start looking at and thinking about to change where we are?
It's going to take a whole landslide move to change where we are. And yes, they do have to look at education and look at it from what we need to have future young people in the labour market. And is it the right way? Do we really need 9 to 3 every day? Can't we change things up a bit so it's easy for working parents? There's all these things to consider. And the thing you said about trust, James, is quite a thing really, because children generally will trust adults, but adult has to win that trust. And when you're in school in a class with loads of kids, and you've got some that have behavioural problems, it's a real problem for the teachers. I think from what I can see in the schools that I've worked with, I think you need more pastoral people to do the things that are not directly linked to learning. There needs to be more pastoral people within schools, especially secondary schools, so you can free up teachers to actually do what they're paid to do, which is to teach and and let children learn. But more pastoral care, bring in more teachers with the skills necessary to deal with inner city areas have big problems, and you need to bring in teachers who are not afraid to deal with some of the issues that are in schools today.
And is that generally because, again, if I look at the way that the society is developing and growing, is that because teachers are scared of doing things or saying things that because of repercussions, or is it bigger than that?
I don't know the answer to that, really. I think the teachers are so pressured into meeting targets and things that some of them that I've spoken to are just focused on the children in that cohort, making that level of progress, to get to the next stage. Yeah, it's the whole thing is multifaceted, really. Yeah. The problem's multifactorial. There's so many things, but I see teachers and senior leaderships, and I look at them and I think, how do you do that job? Because it's constant interruption. Sometimes when I'm in school, you with a senior leader or whatever, there's constant interruption. There's buzzers going off. There's kids coming in. And I don't know. I just think that's really, really, to me, that looks like really hard work.
Yeah.
But
the environment is the
environment. That's the word. The environment is very, very chaotic. I don't know. It must feel like that for the children as well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and it probably does. I mean, again, as I said at the start, my kids are. One of them is through the education process, and the other is almost through the education process. But when I go to school and I go and see over the years from primary all the way through secondary, you kind of sit there in reception if you're seeing a head or whatever it might be, and it's chaotic. Like the energy in the school is just it's almost like it's non-stop. There's always something going on, isn't there? Yeah. And the teachers are having to deal with that. And of course, we also have to remember that teachers are now, what's the average class size? 30.
Well, this is another case in point. School roles are in primary schools, and some of the ones that I've worked with, the school roles falling. So there's less. A few years ago, everybody thought there's going to be a major, we need to build all these more schools. We need to do all this because there's going to be so many more children. Yeah. And actually, there was less. Oh. So schools are some schools I've worked with are having to close classes, merge classes, and make one class where there would have been two. Right. The problem with that is the funding goes, because the funding is per pupil. Yeah. So if there's less pupils, there's less funding, and if there's less funding, it's like a vicious circle. So we've not in primary schools, we've got gaps, So they're not people queuing up to get into schools and things. In certain areas there might be, but in primary schools, in the state sector, classroom school roles are generally falling. So we don't have enough children to fill all the classes in some areas. Wow. So whilst that's great for the kids because the class is smaller, it's not great for the school because they're losing funding. So there's all those problems. So schools are really, really on a tight budget. Yeah. And so if you try and say to them, do some fancy things for the teachers, like have a wellbeing away day and all this, it costs money, which they don't have. Yeah, it's either that or pay for books, Yeah.
So with regards to the teachers, and you've touched on that quite nicely at the right time. So I'm going to bring back the kind of the teacher training, if you like. So all schools have inset days, and those inset days, my understanding, Valerie, are very much there used for training, development, but also they're also for the school to talk about what they're doing. How much training is given to teachers to combat some of this issue around the mental health within kids, the how to deal with difficult situations with kids, how to have conversations with parents about their kids? How much training is given to teachers around that? Because that seems to be the boiling pot that's about to explode.
I'm not aware of any training given to any. And funny enough, I'm just got myself a role as a school governor in a girls' secondary school, which my first meeting is tomorrow. So I'm going to ask them that very question, because not tomorrow, sorry, on Monday. Yeah. So I'm going to ask them that question, because teaching, you're trained to be a teacher, and you're trained to, how children learn, you know how to make them learn, you know your subject, and you know how to deliver it, and you know how to write a training plan, and you know how to mark, you know all these things. And if you're a specialist teacher, you know your subject inside out. Yeah. What you're not taught is children coming from really poor backgrounds, children with special needs, children of different religious groups. There's a bit more information now for teachers around different religious groups, so that's good. But really, dealing with some of the socio-economic factors that turn up in the classroom, as this teacher said, child didn't want to go home, and because her mother's partner or her dad, I don't remember what it was in a shouty mood, and so she didn't want to go home. Children coming to school hungry. There's children coming to school with all sorts of problems. Teachers don't go to teaching for that. But there needs to be some awareness raising for them so that they themselves can deal with it and not get so stressed out as some of them actually are.
Yeah.
So
this is fascinating conversation. It's probably something that we could probably debate for hours and hours on end, Valerie, because it does feel like there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. But with the work that you've done within the education system and the academies and the governor that you're on now, what approaches, if any, what approaches are you taking specifically that have had significant impact that maybe other people that work in the education system could be consider looking at?
I think it starts with got to look at the well-being and the health of the school principal or head teacher, whatever they're called. Yeah. They're the ones that are alone. They're the ones that are carrying the whole school. Because in secondary school, it must be even harder. So there must be something to be done for the well-being of school leaders. Because that, you could get a phone call saying, well, Ofsted's coming in the next couple of days, then you'll get everything in place. Well-being of head teachers and for the teachers to be there. And for some supervision, like how we have supervision for social workers, clinical supervision. So there should be something for teachers for they could go and talk about how they're doing. There's performance management, but it's mainly data-driven. But there must be something we can do better in terms of well-being for people who work with children and young people. And I think something around coaching for head teachers. And it doesn't have to be coaching from, about their work and whatever. It could be coaching by someone from a completely different sector who knows nothing about education. And the head teacher can say, well, this is me. These are the things I need, and offload and talk and run ideas off of and all that sort of thing. There has to be that. Primary schools are quite hard, head teachers, because the head teacher sometimes even had to go and teach classes because, at least in a secondary school, that doesn't appear to happen because they've got the whole senior leadership team around them. The pressure on head teachers, to me, I look at them and I think, no.
But even not only head teachers, in certain secondary schools, the big secondary schools, they have heads of year, heads of departments, and all of those heads of year and heads of departments have a dual role of teaching and being the head. So it is tough.
One of the people I talked to, she was a head of year. She's a head of year, and she was just saying how hard it is and how much better it would be if there was more pastoral care, And I talked to one person in a school where she said every time she told off the child for doing something naughty in a primary school, parent used to make a complaint. And when the parent made a complaint, then the head teacher had to get involved. So in the end, she just said, what's the point? And so there's a lot of that as well.
And look, one of the things that I've done recently, and this would be my kind of final question for you, Valerie. One of the things that I did recently with my son, who has been through GCSEs, he knew that he didn't want to stay in the education system. He wanted to get out and get into work, but didn't really know what. So I spent some time with him, and we did exactly what you talked about the head teachers needing, which is looking at what are the things that you enjoy, what are the things that you like, what goes on outside of school versus what goes on in school, and looking at that holistic picture to help him to define where he should go, what he should do, what he might be good at doing. It transpired that he wanted to go into the military, and he's joined the Royal Marines, but he's joined at 16 and a half because he didn't want to go any further in the education system, which is fine. And I fully support him in that process. But, for me, as I said earlier, I work with individuals and I work with businesses to help them to help their employees to love their job more every day. That's what I do. Industries like teaching, other industries that I work with, they struggle to do that because there are so many pressures that come in from a work perspective. I always say, look, you've got to understand what are the things you love to do at work, what are the things you love to do outside of work, and how do you make sure you find the time to do both? Because if you do both, suddenly it helps you to love your job. And if you love your job, it helps you to love your life. And there is a huge piece from a teaching perspective that you said that people go into teaching because they want to help kids to grow, to develop, to help educate them. And that's their passion. Any tips or hints for either teachers or parents that might have children that are struggling that you can give that might help them with their own personal level of engagement that might help them love school and therefore help them to love their life more, or love their job as a teacher that then helps them to love their life? Any tips or hints that you can give them from a chief people officer perspective?
For parents, it's about engaging with the school and understanding what your child is doing in school, understanding what level your child is at school, and understanding that when they're little children, parental input is very, very important in learning, because if you're not reading at bedtime, to me, that's a problem. If you're not looking at things to address their educational needs as a parent, that's a problem. A lot of parents actually don't know that. They think once a child is in school, it's the school's responsibility to teach my child everything that my child needs to know. No, it isn't. It's the parent's responsibility. So that's first of all. From a teacher's perspective, from the training that they have, I wonder if there's anything in that training about inclusivity in terms of working with children from different cultures, because that's a big issue. And in terms of working with children with special educational needs, that's a big issue. In terms of the school, from the school leadership, how do I keep my teachers engaged? How do I retain them? How do I make them want to stay within this school? You do that by making some flexibility into their working day, giving them some freedom. So, for example, if they're not teaching, why do they have to be in school? Why can't they have half a day every week, each week, to be at home, to do whatever it is they want to do at home, as long as they've done their learning plans or whatever it is they need to be doing, and their CPD? Give them that freedom and time to develop themselves. Instead of pushing this thing about, data driven, have we met this goal? And the schools sometimes can't help it because DFE put all these restraints and restrictions on them. But at the same time, if you want to retain teachers, the ones I spoke to said they just need that time, to get on with their own professional development.
And it's kind of, and that's a really nice place to kind of close and finish, Valerie, because, when I think about it and I look at it and I talk about kind of how do you engage people, the key things around engaging people in what they do is, making sure that you give them flexibility. We know that since COVID, making sure that they know where you're going and they've got a real vision and a culture of, why are we doing this and what are we doing to achieve this? And then secondly, it's almost a little bit ironic, treats the teachers like they're adults, not like kids.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that we teach the kids to do things and structure, but we do that for a reason. But if we teach the teachers, or we treat the teachers with that adult lens, and kind of going back to that trust piece, we trust you to do what we expect you to do, and therefore go and do that. And if that means you work in the evening or in the afternoon because you're not here, then that's fine. So
yeah. And one more thing would be quite nice for teachers. They can only take their holidays in holiday time. It costs a fortune. As parents, we know that when we you want to go on holiday, and our son was school age, he had to go in the summer holidays. And why can't they, one teacher, 1 year, 2 weeks off when it's term time, so that they can go on holiday if they want to? Why not?
I don't know is the answer, but then I guess, if you're sitting and you're not in the education system and you're looking at it from the outside in, you might sit there and say, well, that teachers do get a lot of holiday, but, it's that kind of way up. And again, that's probably a political conversation, a political debate that says, can you have some flexibility as a teacher to have a few weeks off here and there? I don't know the answer to the question.
Not every year, just once in a while. And make that time up at another time in the summer holidays or whatever.
Look, Valerie, this has been a 36 minutes or has already gone, and time has disappeared. It's a much needed debate, is the education system, not just around how it's set out today, but from a teacher's perspective, it needs to be looked at. From a child's perspective, it needs to be looked at. And I do genuinely think there is a piece that says, how do people engage parents more around the education system? So, it's not a one size fits all. Every child is different. Every school is different. Every teacher is different. I talk about that all the time from an engagement perspective of, what engages one doesn't engage another. And when you've got a classroom of 30 kids and they've all got different needs, it becomes very difficult to engage them. So It's a much needed conversation, and I'm sure we could continue talking about this for hours and hours and hours, and probably still not come to a resolution of what's the best way to do it. But hopefully this has helped some people. Hopefully, if you're in the education system and you've been watching this, there's some things to go and think about. I don't think anything we've talked about will be new to you, because I speak to teachers and I know teachers and people that work in education. I know this is happening everywhere. I guess the question is, the more we can talk about it, the more we can open up people's eyes to it. Maybe it will get onto a discussion point and something will change. But Valerie, thank you very much for your time. It's been great having you on the podcast. I look forward to speaking to you soon.
All right. Thanks, James. Thank you so much.
Thank you.